As a lifelong fan of the genre, I've watched hundreds, if not thousands, of horror movies throughout the years. It wasn't easy, but I have comprised a list of my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. Let's go. What's up, YouTube? It's your boy John from the Jersey Shore, and I'm here to talk a little bit about each of my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. I have bought, collected, ran to, and watched just about every horror movie that I could possibly get my hands on. It was not very easy to narrow my favorite movies down to 10. It's kind of like picking your favorite children. But I did my best and I gave it a shot. So here we go. Coming in at number 10 is Martyrs. Martyrs was released in 2008. It was written and directed by Pascal Legueur. Frankly, this movie is impossible to sum up in a few short words. It feels like two different movies, set in two different times. I've heard mixed reviews about this movie since it first came out. It's been called everything from beautifully shot, to a horrible film, to torture porn, to I can't see it again. I watched it, but I'll never watch it again. It's too much to take. I love this movie. It definitely does feel like two different movies. I think torture porn is a little bit harsh. It's a story about two girls who met in an orphanage, one of which was abused as a little girl and managed to escape. But when she did escape, she left somebody behind, and that has sort of tortured her throughout her entire life. Somehow she manages to find the family that tortured her. And rather than contacting the authorities, she decides to extract revenge on her own. She takes matters into her own hands, and it gets ugly. Once she musters up the courage to go knock on that family's door, this movie takes a very dark turn very quickly, and it only gets darker from there. I will definitely admit that this movie is not easy to get through. If you are faint of heart, or if you are weak stomach, or if you are extremely emotional, this is probably not a movie for you, because this movie will definitely tug on all of those strings. Pascal Legueur definitely must have something wrong with him, because this movie is deep and it's twisted. In the mind that this came out of, there's something's got to be going on in there. But with all that being said, I couldn't recommend this movie highly enough. This movie's fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I've watched it several times. I just happened upon it in Best Buy one day. I knew nothing of this movie, and this was pre-iPhone days. I brought this movie home and watched it, and I was touched, I'll put it that way, by this movie. If you can locate a copy of this movie, watch it. It's worth every penny. And at number 9, we have the movie that put the name Clive Barker on the map, 1987's Hellraiser. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times I've watched this movie. I saw this movie when I was in high school, and I thought the Pinhead was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. The feel of this movie is just filthy. It feels dirty. It feels gothic. It feels very wrong. The characters are bad in this movie, and I don't mean bad as in poorly written. I think that they're bad as in just not good intentions. You have one character who's a womanizing scumbag who winds up dead, and he ends up coming back to life through the assistance of some mythical puzzle box. He's slowly coming back to form and taking shape through the blood of innocent victims, and he's getting his hands on those victims through his sister-in-law. The sister-in-law is bringing men into the house so that he can use their blood to regain his form. He sucks the life out of them so that he can regain his life. Unfortunately for him, he did the Cenobites wrong. The Cenobites are Pinhead, Chatterbox, Butterball, and I believe the fourth one is called Female Cenobite. That's very original. It always blew my mind that Clive Barker could come up with these 4 amazing characters, this amazing looking puzzle box, this amazing story, this amazing atmosphere, and Female Cenobite. There were several sequels made to this movie, which for the most part were pretty bad. The second one was pretty good, but then there were like 9 or 10 more, and none of them even come close to comparing to the first or second one, especially the original, Hellraiser. The closing scene of this movie is fantastic when they finally get their hands on the guy that they've been chasing throughout the movie. They get him cornered in a room, and all these chains come out and literally start to rip him apart, and they have his face all stretched out, and they get a real big close-up of his face, and he says, "Jesus wept." And then he explodes. It's an amazing movie. You gotta see it. My words cannot describe how freaking awesome this movie is. Those of you out there who haven't seen Hellraiser, watch Hellraiser. You can ignore the rest of them. Maybe watch Hellbound, but you gotta see Hellraiser. Coming in at number 8 is John Carpenter's 1982 film, The Thing. The Thing has a wonderful cast headed up by Kurt Russell and Wilford Brimley. Everything about this movie is crazy, but the thing that stands out to just about every horror movie in the world who has seen this is the practical effects. They're absolutely amazing. To this day, I still think that that's probably my favorite practical effects in any movie that I've ever seen in my life. This movie takes place in Antarctica. There's a group of explorers out there, and they actually come across a spaceship. What are you doing? What do you have that's frozen? You went to the store and bought popsicles? All right. Unfortunately for these guys, what came out of that spaceship was some shape-shifting cloning monster that's killing their dogs, it's killing them, it's cloning them. The thing is amazing. Their first run-in with this creature is with the dogs that they have with them. They have a bunch of huskies there, and they hear a bunch of commotion in the cage. They go in there, and one of the dogs has been cloned and infected with whatever the thing is, and it rips open like a flower, and it starts to kill all the dogs around it. It's ridiculous. It looks amazing. It scared me to death when I was a kid. And then it begins to clone the humans, and that's where it gets interesting. The guys have to somehow figure out which one of them is the human and which one of them is a cloned version of the human. It's absolutely insane, this movie. We're coming up on 40 years ago that this movie was made, and the effects still to this day hold up. All the effects, these aliens, they vibrate, and they're wet and bloody, and they're just angry. This movie is amazing. I recently got a limited edition Steelbook Blu-ray copy of this movie, and it looks amazing. This movie's still relatively easy to find. If you want to see it, you can get your hands on a copy. If you haven't seen The Thing, you really need to. Coming in at number 7 on my list is the third installment of George Romero's Dead series. It's 1985's Day of the Dead. I was a pretty big fan of Night of the Living Dead. I was a really big fan of Dawn of the Dead. I absolutely love Day of the Dead. That movie, the gore in that movie is just on another level. It's set in an underground silo, obviously during the zombie apocalypse. Half of the people that are in there, more than half of the people, probably 3/4 of the people that are down there in that silo are military. You got a handful of military down there. You have a few civilians down there, a few pilots. You have a doctor down there, and you have several zombies down there. They have corralled and captured several zombies so that the doctor, who they refer to as Dr. Frankenstein, he is doing experiments on these zombies to see if he can figure out either a cure or figure out what makes them tick. One zombie in particular, his name is Bub, and Bub seems to be above average intelligence for a zombie. And if there's ever been a star zombie in a movie, it would probably be Bub of Day of the Dead. If you are into the horror genre enough, I have no doubt that you've seen Bub. You just may or may not even realize that you've seen him. He's one of the more iconic images in the horror movie genre. He's definitely the most recognized zombie in the George Romero universe. Bub was portrayed by Sherman Howard, and he did a fantastic job. I would go as far as to say that he's definitely the best looking zombie in the entire George Romero universe as well. Definitely the best acted, best looking, and most recognized zombie. This is one of those pleasant discoveries that I made in the day of the VHS tape when you would go down to a local store and rent movies. And this one just struck a chord with me. I love the gore. The realism in this movie was just amazing. Tom Savini did the special effects in this movie. Greg Nicotero was his assistant. Greg Nicotero of Walking Dead fame, for those of you out there who don't know who he now is responsible for a lot of what you see on The Walking Dead. And he was trained by Tom Savini. So you have two of the most famous practical effects artists in the history of horror movies together on this film, so you can only imagine why this movie looks as good as it does. Go out there and pick up a copy of Day of the Dead. The movie's fantastic. You won't regret it. Coming in at number 6 on my list is the 1981 John Landis classic, An American Werewolf in London. I remember the first time I ever saw this movie. I was actually over my Little League baseball coach's house playing with his son on a Saturday afternoon, and this movie was on. When the nude scenes would come up, I remember him picking up a blanket so that we couldn't see him, but everything else he let us watch. And there's just the werewolf attack in the beginning of this movie helped turn me into the horror movie fan that I am now. And this is another movie that's got practical effects in it that are just stunning. The the initial werewolf transformation in this movie is the stuff of legend. I recently watched this movie, and it still holds up. The special effects in this movie are also another level. Rick Baker was the practical effects artist on this film, and his job in transforming the human into werewolf form was the stuff of legend. It's still the stuff of legend. The stretching of the feet, the bulging of the spine, the hands, the face popping out, the hair growing in, the ears. It was just everything about it was amazing. The werewolf transformation in this movie, I've never seen anything like it before or since. Rick Baker has probably been regarded as a god in the special effects industry ever since this movie was made. Pretty much the entire premise of this movie, you got two Americans visiting London. They're walking around in the moors. They come across the bar called the Slaughtered Lamb. They go in there to get something to eat, something to drink, to warm up a little bit. And they see a pentagram on the wall. They question the pentagram. They wonder what it's for, and they basically get kicked out of the bar. Everybody in that bar knows that there's a werewolf out there. The woman behind the bar tells them you can't let them go. It's murder. But they say, it's none of their business. We don't need to tell everybody our business. And they just let these two boys go. Right before they walk out the door, they say, beware of the moon and stick to the road. And it starts to rain. They walk off the road and there is a full moon. And lo and behold, there's a werewolf out there. It starts to circle them and it attacks them. The werewolf attacks them and just rips one of them to pieces. It's just an aggressive, brutal attack on this kid. And when the other one realizes after he's done running that he left his friend, he runs back and he's just basically a pile of soup with a head on it. The werewolf jumps on him, scratches him, then eventually he begins to turn into a werewolf. This movie's spectacular. A lot of people don't think that this movie is a horror movie. A lot of people consider this more of a comedy than a horror movie. I get that argument. This is not the scariest movie that I've ever seen, but I absolutely love this movie. The story's great, the effects are great, the acting's great. Everything about this movie's fantastic. John Landis is pure genius. So if you haven't seen American Werewolf in London and you want something that's scary and funny and has incredible effects in it and has a great story, this movie's for you. Go watch American Werewolf in London. Next up at number 5 is 1974's Tobe Hooper film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This movie is probably on the Mount Rushmore of horror movies. Other than the Universal Monsters and maybe Regan McNeil and probably Norman Bates, you have Leatherface. He was the first big horror movie slasher icon. Leatherface was portrayed by Gunnar Hansen, and he did a fantastic job as Leatherface. Just a big, brooding, hulking, grotesque, human flesh-wearing psychopath. So in this movie, you got a van full of guys who pick up a hitchhiker, and they wind up stopping at the wrong place at the wrong time and running into the wrong house. One of the male characters walks up to the front door of the house that Leatherface and his family live in. He calls, but nobody comes, so he takes it upon himself to walk through that door, and he walks up to some sliding door that's inside the house, something that you would see in like a butcher shop, and Leatherface pops out and bashes him in the head with a hammer. And after he takes care of that guy, he grabs his girl and hangs her on a meat hook, then puts her in a freezer. Then they wind up killing the dude that's in the wheelchair with a chainsaw, and that leaves us with our final girl. She winds up sitting at a kitchen table for dinner with Leatherface and his jacked up family. And while she's sitting at this table, they're holding her head over a bucket and they're trying to get the grandfather to kill her with a hammer, beating her in the head. But he's so old he can't even hold the hammer. He literally looks like a corpse. She shakes herself loose, jumps out the window, runs up on the highway, and ends up in the back of a pickup truck to get away. While Leatherface is standing on the road, swinging a chainsaw around his head like the psychopath that he is. This movie just feels gross. It looks gross. It's shot gross. It's gross subject matter. It's got the main characters wearing human flesh for a mask. There's furniture and lamps made out of human flesh and bones. There's chicken feathers all over this house. It has a completely, you feel like you want to take a shower when you're done watching this movie. And I love every second of it. Tobe Hooper made a lot of movies after he made this one, but he never made another one that was as good as this. I can only imagine what it had to have been like in 1974 to see a movie like this. By today's standards, this movie's pretty mellow. It's really not, it's not anything hard to take because what we see on the evening news every night is worse than this. But for 1974, this movie had to be pretty shocking. Another element of creepiness to this movie is that Leatherface is loosely based on the serial killer, the real-life serial killer, Ed Gein from Wisconsin. If you haven't seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you should not be considering yourself a horror movie fan. Next up is the 1980 film by Stanley Kubrick, which was an adaptation of Stephen King's novel, The Shining. I read The Shining, and Stanley Kubrick's version of it is really not similar, is not in line with the book itself. And I also read several times that Stephen King was not a big fan of that movie because it was so different. Stephen King can feel however he wants to feel about this movie. This movie's outstanding. I think that this might be Jack Nicholson's best role of all time, in my opinion. Shelley Duvall's even cool in this movie. This was before she was Olive Oyl. Just the thought of three people being alone in this gigantic hotel, snowed in and desolate, is terrifying. Throw in the element of the hotel being haunted, crazy naked old ladies upstairs, bars that are empty, bars that are then filled with ghosts, little boys riding up and down hallways seeing dead girls standing in a hallway, blood flowing through the elevators in the hallways. Jack Nicholson did a fantastic job portraying someone whose mind is slowly slipping away to insanity. The final scene of this movie, when Jack is chasing Danny around in the snow with the axe, that's the stuff that nightmares are made of. I was quite surprised a couple months ago when I saw that this movie was finally, after 39 years, getting a sequel called Dr. Sleep with Ewan McGregor. It's about Danny Torrance as an adult, and he still has The Shining, and it looks like he's meeting several people who also have The Shining. It looks pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing it. If you want to see a great movie that just makes you feel uncomfortable, get The Shining. It's a pretty slow burn, but going insane is not a quick process. Alright, so before I get into my top 3 favorite horror movies of all time, let's have a quick recap. Coming in at number 10 is 2008's Martyrs. Coming in at number 9 is 1987's Clive Barker classic Hellraiser. Coming in at number 8 is 1982's The Thing. At number 7 we have George Romero's Bloodbath, Day of the Dead. At number 6, I don't care what you say, it's a horror movie, American Werewolf in London. At number 5, one of the faces of the Mount Rushmore of horror, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And at number 4, we have Jack Torrance spiraling into madness in The Shining. Alright, coming in at number 3 is the 1980 Bloodbath Friday the 13th. This movie stars Adrienne King, a very young upstart named Kevin Bacon, and Betsy Palmer. This is also one of the movies that started it all for me. I saw this when I was really young, and this is another one that just left an impression on me. This movie had a higher kill count than Halloween, it was far bloodier than Halloween, and it really upped the game of the slasher subgenre. I'm sure just about everybody watching this video knows that Jason Voorhees was not the killer in this movie. It was actually his mom, Pamela Voorhees. She's extracting revenge because the camp counselors were screwing around while her little boy was in the lake drowning. I loved everything about Friday the 13th. It didn't bother me in the slightest little bit that Jason wasn't the killer in this movie. His mom did just fine. I don't think I don't even think it's possible for a horror movie fan out there to have not seen Friday the 13th. But if you haven't seen Friday the 13th, turn this off and go watch it. Coming in at number 2, 1973's The Exorcist. I probably saw this movie when I was 9 or 10 years old, and it scared me to death. I am now 48 years old, and I have never been as scared watching a movie as I was when I watched The Exorcist. I've watched this movie with my son. He tells me he doesn't think that this movie is scary, and while I'm watching this movie with my son who doesn't think it's scary, it still made me scared. I don't know, man. I think it's just the subject matter. This just got under my skin, and it still, all these years later, still gets under my skin. I love this movie. I love everything about this movie. I met Linda Blair. I couldn't express to her enough how much I love this movie. I long for movies out there to scare me as much as this movie has. This movie came out when I was 2 years old. I saw it when I was probably 10 years old, and nothing has ever been able to scare me like this one has. If I could find a movie that scared me half as much as this movie did, I'd be happy. This movie is about a little girl who becomes possessed by the devil himself. Not just some random demon, not a couple demons, not anything like that. The devil. You slowly see this girl go from being her little innocent self to a just grotesque, skin-cracked, pea soup vomiting, evil being. The first time I ever saw this movie uncensored, when I saw what this girl is doing with a crucifix, I was shocked that they were even allowed to put this in a movie. The scenes at the end of this movie when those priests are trying to perform The Exorcist, it's just nightmare fuel. Everything about this movie is just unsettling and scary. I would say that if I had to pick one movie in my entire life that I would say is just flat out scary, it's The Exorcist. For those of you out there who have not seen The Exorcist, if you don't feel like sleeping for a couple nights, go pick this one up. Alright, that's it. We're down to my number one favorite horror movie of all time. And if you hadn't guessed, that would be 1978's John Carpenter classic, Halloween. This movie is about the simplest of simple ideas. You have a few high school girls innocently just babysitting and carving pumpkins and going to go trick-or-treating, when all of a sudden, a psychotic killer shows up and starts killing everybody. You have his doctor trying to track him down and capture him before he does any more damage. You have the killer lurking in the shadows trying to kill anything and everybody that he can get his hands on. Then you have the babysitter, Laurie Strode, stuck in the middle with these two kids in the house. Michael kills all Laurie's friends. Then Michael tries to kill Laurie. Michael shows up, Michael kills all Laurie's friends. Michael tries to kill Laurie. The doctor shows up, the doctor shoots Michael. Michael falls off a balcony. The music plays. Michael disappears, and a horror legend is born. It's such a simple story. It's such a simple premise. It was made on next to no budget by a guy who simply wanted to have his name above the title. And now over the last 41 years, there's been a total of 11 movies made, with another one coming in 2020 and another one coming in 2021, all based off of this simple idea in 1978. I love John Carpenter. I love Michael Myers. I love Halloween, Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, Mustafa Akkad. Every sequel, every actor who's ever been in any movie, everything that has ever had anything to do with Halloween, all the way down to the guy who mops up the fake blood when the movie's over. I can't get enough sequels. I don't want to ever hear that there's not going to be another sequel. I don't ever want it to end. I think it's brilliant that Mustafa Akkad put it in a contract that Michael Myers can never die. When I'm a little old man sitting in a rocking chair, I want to be amped up waiting to go see Halloween 45. John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, and Mustafa Akkad are responsible for a gigantic chunk of movie history. It's been pretty neat to watch these movies my whole life and watch that little idea in 1978 grow into the horror institution that it has become. It gave Jamie Lee Curtis a career. It gave John Carpenter a career. All stemming from that Captain Kirk mask. Alright folks, that's going to do it for me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed making it. It was wonderful to take this little trip down memory lane and talk about some of the movies that I love. I really hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, please give me a thumbs up. If you really enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I would love for you to go on this journey with me. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Have a kick-ass day. And thank you for watching.